Today we are going to explain an American science fiction drama movie called The Man from Earth, Holocene. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The film opens with a man named John who is living a primitive life in an unknown forest. He starts a fire with some wood, and at this point we didn't know how he ended up here. Professor Carolyn Kittredge is a university professor who is giving her students a tour of a prehistoric museum. When Isabel, a student who is separated from the group, is drawing prehistoric human skulls and jawbones nearby, Carolyn describes how Homo sapiens lived during the Holocene epoch. Isabel is with her best friend Tara, who spots Professor John Young, a lecturer on courses relating to religion, looking at the exhibit of prehistoric humans. They talk about him before deciding to approach him and say hello. He is actually there because he is waiting for his girlfriend, who turns out to be Professor Kittredge. He instantly shifts the topic of discussion when Tara asks to take a photo with him. In the evening, Carolyn stops over and warmly welcomes John as he is grading his pupils' assignments. She points out the fact that John's hair is turning gray and suggests that he should color his hair. We again see Isabel, who is talking to her mother on the phone. She starts to get angry at her and disrespects her own mother. Tara walks in on this and sees that Isabel was rude to her mother. Tara explains to Isabel how a mother never wants anything bad for their children and that she should never be rude to her. Isabel also understands and regrets yelling at her mother. She instantly calls back and apologizes. Afterwards, a college student named Leko is seen doing boxing before class. His friend Philip, who was standing by downstairs, calls him. They headed to Professor Young's class at Chico Community College once Leko is ready. They talk about the parallels and contrasts between Buddha and Jesus in the classroom along with Isabel and Tara. Professor Young gently declines their invitation to join them for a vegan dinner night to celebrate the end of the school year after class. Professor Gill, a different colleague, approaches Professor Young and informs him that he is now a grandfather. He requests a drink from Professor Young by the sports arena to commemorate the birth of his grandson. They appreciate the sunset despite the terrible whiskey. Gill asks John if he regrets not having children, but John won't talk about it. Later that evening, as Professor Young is preparing dinner, Isabel drops off assignments for Professor Kittredge to mark. She requests the books from Professor Young that she may check out. She is directed to the den, where he tells her to get whatever she wants. One of the books Isabel takes out is authored by Arthur Jenkins. She was reading the book in her apartment when Tara unexpectedly joins her after returning from a sorority party. They see that the author has signed the book as, "To my dear friend, John Oldman," but the spine is still intact, indicating that John has not yet read it. They determine Professor Young's age based on the date in the author's signature and are perplexed as to why he would be referred to as an old guy given that he was apparently around 30 years old at the time. As they search for Arthur Jenkins online, they discover that he is a well-known archaeologist who wrote a book about a conversation with the man from Earth, a Buddhist university professor who claims to be 14,000 years old. Despite his claims that it was nonfiction, the academic community views that book as science fiction, which embarrasses Jenkins. It is concluded that the man from Earth fits Professor Young's descriptions. Tara and Isabel visit Philip at his home, where Leko is also present. They passionately describe their research and how Jenkins' book depicts an immortal guy who is well-versed in numerous subjects, teaches at nearby colleges, is hardly ever seen online, avoids having his photo taken, and switches identities every 10 years. His last names, however, are adapted forms of historical phrases, and his first name is invariably John. Philip, a devout Christian who offers to assist the girls in learning more about Professor John Young, and Leko both have serious doubts about the veracity of the story. Art Jenkins is seen working in the garden with his pig, Betsy, in Searchlight, Nevada, which is a long, far way. After playing some online chess when he gets home, he discovers an email from Isabel Chang inquiring about the John Oldman he talked about in his book. Suddenly overcome with emotions, he responds that she better go to hell. When Jenkins doesn't respond favorably, the students break into John and Carolyn's house in search of further evidence. Leko discovers a box of books in the cellar authored by several Johns and snaps photos of them. When Isabel sees Carolyn's car in the driveway, she tells her pals to go right away. Prior to that, she captures a picture of John and Carolyn in the living room, albeit with John's face just partially visible. They are able to flee thanks to the home's back door. They do more research into the many John's identities. Each identity appears to be non-existent, and the publisher no longer has the author's contact information. John feels the desire to go hunting in the woods in the meanwhile. At first reluctant, Carolyn eventually relinquishes control and lets him go. He claims that he needs to connect with nature because he hasn't been feeling like himself recently. He travels to the woods in his truck and spends the night there. John is using stone to make a fire in the woods like a hominid from the distant past. Surprisingly, his bleeding hand doesn't appear to be healing as quickly as it should. He returns home despite being perplexed. Isabel calls Jenkins once more and expresses her conviction that her lecturer, John Young, is actually John Oldman. Jenkins doesn't respond, but he pays close attention to the voicemail. He replies to the message by requesting Isabel to send him a clear image of John Young before they speak. Following that, Isabel gets a call from an elderly woman who claims to have known John Pleased back in 1957 when he attended a small college in Idaho. The individual fits the description of John Young. That call is a response to the numerous emails and phone calls Isabel and her friends have made to numerous universities around the United States. Before class, Isabel, Leko, and Tara tried to snap a photo with Professor Young by bringing him coffee, but John glaringly messes up the pictures so that his face is not clearly visible. After class, they makes another attempt to persuade Philip to trust them, but he is still resistant, especially in light of the possibility that John Young is the Jesus Christ figure that all Christians venerate. Leko and Isabel don't give up though, so they sneak up to John's window late at night and take images of him sleeping. Jenkins agrees to meet and speak with John after Isabel sends him the photos. He says goodbye to his pig and gets ready to travel by his car. Tara arrives at John's office on campus and tries to flirt with him, but he rejects her and sends her away. John informs Gil that he wants to resign and that he can suggest a different lecturer for the following term because he feels in danger. Gil is miffed at first, but eventually comes around. Although Carolyn is also disappointed when John informs her that he has to leave, she accepts him because there is nothing she can do. Isabel is shocked when Tara tells her about her activities. She claims that Tara's statements might cause John to vanish more quickly. When Jenkins answers the phone, he is still 2 hours away, so John Young must wait till Jenkins arrives. Before the four kids arrive and confront him, John is burning his one remaining photo with Carolyn and getting ready to pack his possessions into his truck. Isabel urges him to acknowledge that he is John Oldman, the real-life representative of Jesus Christ, by displaying Jenkins' book to him. John declines, and the students depart after a brief exchange. Leko chases him from behind, and when his head strikes the ground, he loses consciousness. Philip is in charge of the comatose John and is meant to call an ambulance for him, while Jenkins' car breaks down in the middle of the road, so Isabel, Tara, and Leko go to pick him up. He ties John up in the cellar, though. He questions John about the truth when he awakens. John begs Philip to let him go, but Philip is uncertain and uneasy. He acknowledges that if John reveals the truth, he would release him. John acknowledges that more than 2,000 years ago, he imparted fundamental spiritual knowledge to a group of people. Later, this led to the development of Christianity, and John came to be known as Christ. Philip initially appears to agree with this, but when he grabs a knife and prepares to liberate John, he begins to have second thoughts about John since he believes that John is meant to possess magical abilities. He starts questioning John once more and becomes enraged when some of John's responses contradict verses in the Bible that he firmly believes in. He concludes that John is not the Christ but the Antichrist since he is not satisfied with John's explanations. John refutes him once more by claiming that the Bible never mentions the Antichrist concept or any specific person by that name. Still emotional, Philip accuses John once more of being the seven-headed beast from the book of Revelation, which has the power to cure miraculously and seeks to amass a vast following on earth. After denying it, John demands that Philip either stab him or release him. After some time, Philip makes the decision to stab John in the heart because he thinks that if John were really Jesus Christ, he wouldn't perish. John, however, appears to pass away as blood pours from the wound following the stab. After being startled, Philip abruptly departs. When Isabel and others attempt to contact Philip on the road but are unsuccessful, they start to worry about him and John. As they get to John's house, they discover blood tracks leading from the basement. They discover a bloody puddle and a broken chair in the basement, but no one was present. Although still incredibly perplexed by the scene in the basement, they decided to phone every neighboring hospital in the hopes that Philip and John are already there and John is receiving medical attention. John is then seen waking up in a cave. A man named Harry approaches and calls for him, bringing him clothing and other survival supplies. Harry apparently knows John's darkest secrets. John accepts when he asks him to go because his father is ill, and they get into Harry's car and drive away. A mid-credits scene shows an FBI agent knocking on Jenkins' door and questioning him. The descriptions of John Young resemble those given by witnesses in a number of previously unsolved murder cases. Jenkins is questioned about Young's potential for violence. He responds that he doesn't know anything and that he thinks anything is possible. Subscribe to see more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.